Now we go live to Greece with former ambassador to Qatar and career diplomat in the United States, serving in the Foreign Service for some time. Our good friend, Ambassador Patrick Theros, live in Greece. Ambassador, thanks for being with us.
John, it's always a pleasure. I love making time for it. I think you're a very impressive show. Love being on it.
Well, thank you, Ambassador. I appreciate that, and you've certainly had a storied career. I really wanted to have you on today, and I know you're making time for us doing your business there live in Greece, but I really wanted to get your take on the Afghanistan negotiations. President Trump determined to draw down the 13,000 troops there. The U.S. in negotiations with the Taliban for a combined government in Afghanistan. The Afghanis not really a part of the discussions. These are being led by the Emir of Qatar, Amir al-Thani, who was kind of trying to broker a peace here, and they're being held in Doha, in Qatar, where of course we have our biggest air base, one of our main allies right now in the Middle East. So, and it seems that we're making progress. I know you've been following this. Where are we right now, Mr. Ambassador, in the Afghan negotiations? And is there peace on the table? Could we get out of there?
We've really hit a bump in the road right now. We were negotiating fairly well with the Taliban. There were a couple of things that had people worried. One of them was the fact that we were negotiating with only our withdrawal, but we weren't negotiating what would follow between the Taliban and the Afghan government. And remember, this is the government we set up and supported 19 years ago. There have been a couple of bumps in the road. The first one has been that for the Saudis and the Emiratis, they won't support any agreement, and we need them to support it because some money has got to be spent. They won't support any agreement unless we move the venue of the talks out of Qatar. So sometime in the next, assuming we get a deal concerning us and the Taliban, assuming we get that deal, it looks like the talks are going to move to Oslo. And then, of course, there is the question of what Afghan government, who's coming to the talks. The Taliban still consider the Afghan government illegitimate, and they want other people involved. There are a lot of factors on the Afghan side as to who really, for example, the Afghan government looked like it was ignoring the wishes of Afghan women who don't want the Taliban back no matter what happens, come hell or high water. The other complication is that all we are getting out of it right now is a Taliban promise that they will not tolerate the existence of Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State or Islamic Jihad, any of these very, very extremist organizations, in territory that they control. And that is a trick word. Frankly, we have no reason to trust the Taliban unless we have worked in some sort of guarantees. First of all, guarantees that they will observe a ceasefire with the government. Two, and two, that they will really expel the Al-Qaeda and ISIS, which are the organizations we should be most frightened of. Remember, the Taliban were hosts to Al-Qaeda before 9/11. Mm-hmm. And even when 9/11 happened, the towers went down. We realized that the attacks had been directed and coordinated from Al-Qaeda operating from Afghanistan. And we went to the Taliban and said, look, we don't have a fight with you. Give us the leadership of Al-Qaeda, which was inside. And the Taliban, they kicked it around back and forth, and in the end said, no, we won't. We don't know for a fact. We knew for a fact, but we don't know for a fact that had anything to do with it. There were a lot of, they were tossing stories around like maybe the Americans set this up or something like that. So our invasion of Afghanistan followed when the Taliban simply refused to do what they claimed they were. They attacked they had condemned the attacks of 9/11, but then didn't do anything to help us bring the perpetrators to justice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when we went in. Then, of course, there were some other mistakes made. The biggest one being that we went to Iraq before we finished the job in Afghanistan. So we took all the resources that we devoted to Afghanistan and trying to rebuild the country quickly and took them out and took them to Iraq, and we know what a mistake that was.
Right.
So, in a way, I have a lot of concerns. I just don't see this turning out nicely. We're going to get if we get our troops out, we're likely to Obama did the same thing in Iraq. He got our troops out of Iraq on a timetable, and he said it's gone. And then within a very short time after all the U.S. troops disappeared, ISIS took over and almost took over all of Iraq. And I'll tell you, given the way Afghanistan is, I am very much afraid that within a few months after pulling out, Afghanistan is going to make the withdrawal from Iraq look like a game of tiddlywinks. Now, a lot of people say, well, who cares if Afghanistan is up in the mountains? Well, we do care because it provides a safe haven. It should not, but it will provide a safe haven for people who really want to hurt us. The Taliban don't. I mean, the Taliban basically are interested in power in Afghanistan. There's never been any indication that the Taliban were the least bit concerned about us. It's the people they keep company with and the people they protect that we need to worry about.
So the concern is that we pull out and we get a repeat of the rise of an ISIS or an Al-Qaeda in Iraq, only on steroids, because without our presence, and we've only got 13,000 troops there. But I mean, here's what the president has told his advisors. He said, I want to get as many troops out as I can. I want to spend as little money as I can, but I don't want another 9/11 scenario. Make it happen. That's a pretty tall order to balance those three, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And personally, I mean, it's not that I've got any ready solutions to the Afghan problem.
Right.
But we've got something that's not going very well for us, but it's not costing us a lot of troops, and it's not costing us as much money as it did, and at least it's maintaining a steady state of keeping the United States safe.
Right.
We go away, the people who have us as a target, not the people who want to take over Afghanistan, but the people who have us as a target are going to find a gracious welcome from the Taliban should they take over. And these are people who've got, the Taliban don't have world domination in their mind, but these other guys do.
So what you're saying, Mr. Ambassador, is the Taliban wants power in Afghanistan. That's their sole goal, not to wreak havoc in the Western world. They just want to control Afghanistan. They want power there. But it's the company they keep, those people that they have friendly relations with, that embed there. They have a friendly government, and then they're able to do what basically Osama bin Laden did when he was there with the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, which is basically plan to do U.S. and Western interest harm.
Yeah, exactly. So, the trade-off is, do we stay where we are now because no one's thought up a really genius idea of how to fix things? Or do we pull out and then run a risk that 3 months, 6 months later, a year later, we're going to have to go back in spades against an entrenched enemy and somebody who's had a chance to dig in?
Mr. Ambassador Patrick Theros, if you were advising President Trump right now, if he called you and said, look, you've been there a long time, what is your advice? What is your counsel? What would it be?
My advice basically is we have to turn this into an Afghan war instead of an American war in Afghanistan. But we can't do that just by pulling out. We've made one big mistake from the very beginning, is we allowed an Afghan government to grow that was basically run by warlords and exiles who went back to Afghanistan to make money off our aid money and things like this. So we never came down hard on the Afghan government to say, you guys want to retain control of your country, you have to start behaving like a real country, which means you get rid of all the people who made a lot of money out of this adventure. There are a lot of good soldiers in the Afghan army who are honest and willing to fight. You fire the ones who aren't, you bring the right ones in. We will give you a huge check to keep the army going, but we're going to take our troops out of the front lines.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is there's not a silver bullet, but the more we can help the Afghans make this into an Afghan war rather than an American war against Afghans, the better we'll be able to sustain it. And in the end, that is the only way. That's the only way I see out on this one.
So the only way is to what? Give is
first of all come down hard on the Afghan government and say the things you've been doing, the corruption, the politics of the armed forces, the fact that you haven't allowed local governors to operate. I mean, all these things. You've got this centralized power in Kabul that is mostly run by a bunch of kleptocrats. And they're honest people there, but there are far too many people at the top of government who aren't. And this is where we got to be strong-arming people. We have to strong-arm them into, you've got really good people in your army, you've got good soldiers, you've got good officers, brave people, people who are willing to die for their country. You got to let them run the war, mm-hmm. and not this bunch of guys who are making money out of it.
Exactly.
And we know who they are. We've just never had, and this now runs through all our administrations, we've never had the guts to walk in and start cracking heads together.
Right. So until we do that, really, but the biggest thing you're saying is a troop pullout runs the risk of creating a vacuum, and then you have an Iraq situation like ISIS on steroids. I mean, that's basically the. All right. I want to shift.
And then we got to go back with a lot more troops against a much more dangerous enemy.
Right. So you're right. So you make it's a bad situation now. It could be a lot worse, and maybe for now we just stabilize it. I mean, there is an argument that says, I mean, you're really the first person who's given me an argument that said we have 13,000 troops there, keep them there. We have troops all over the world, and because the alternative could be we have to put another 30,000 there, and we have a bloody conflict. So, I mean, that is an argument. Well,
exactly. I mean, I don't like what's going on there.
Right.
But there are always worse things, and I'm very much afraid that a pullout would lead to a much worse situation.